Thank you. 12 minutes past 7 is the time. The BBC has revealed that the disgraced priest David Tudor was twice reappointed to a senior role while Stephen Cottrell was Bishop of Chelmsford, the place Tudor was based. Stephen Cottrell is now Archbishop of York, the second most senior position in the church. David Tudor had twice been accused of abuse in separate incidents and had paid a sum of money to an alleged victim. I've been talking to a victim of his who didn't want to use her name. I asked her what she knew of Tudor's position in the church after what happened to her.
Nobody told me anything at the time, so I just went and carried on with my life. And it was only last year when I was reading of the Ferrorian Synod and the appointing of Alexei J that something inside me thought that I ought to Google him just to double check for my own peace of mind. And I was absolutely horrified to see that the church had welcomed him back after only a 5-year suspension. Absolutely horrified.
So you tried to find out what was going on from them, and what actually did they say to you about your right to know?
They basically said it had all been dealt with at the end of the 1980s, and they said he'd been suspended for 5 years and that I could find things out that were on the public domain.
Stephen Cottrell, who was Bishop of Chelmsford, is now Archbishop of York, has said through a spokesperson that he acknowledges that this could have been handled differently and he regrets his handling of the case. Is that enough for you?
Absolutely not. Look, I gave him the benefit of the doubt until I'd listened to the BBC report last Monday. I mean, it is quite clear that he knew a great deal, and I find it really insulting and upsetting that he has just said, oh, well, I feel regret, and I feel that he is backtracking considerably. I would have had more respect for him if he'd just said after that BBC report last week, look, I'm really sorry. I am really sorry. I got this wrong. And I don't believe he did enough.
Has anyone ever explained to you in plain terms why David Tudor was allowed back into the church?
No, it wasn't until I heard that report, as I say, that I managed to join those dots. So discovering that Archbishop Carey had let him in again so freely and so willingly and seemingly to have wiped his slate clean, I still can't process that. I'm not quite sure how I'm ever going to process that. And he ought to be ashamed of himself too.
What should happen now?
Well, I'd like to ask Stephen Cottrell something, if I may. My grandma died earlier this year at the age of 100, and she lost her faith because of what Tudor did to her granddaughter. And she never stepped inside a church again from the moment she learned of what he had done. It was a reaction to what she knew was wrong. It is a real shame that he hasn't responded to events with that same sense of urgency, showing love and compassion and an internal sense of right and wrong. Where is his moral compass? I really worry that someone who doesn't have that is waiting in the wings to step in as the figurehead for the Church of England. And I think the church deserves better.
Do you think he should step down?
I think he really must now. It's got beyond apologies. And sadly, I wouldn't have said that a week ago, but I'm saying that now.
That was a victim of David Tudor talking to me earlier. Let's turn to Sleem Makbool, the BBC's religion editor, who's on the line. And when she was referring then to him possibly being in a position to step into the bigger role being the Archbishop of Canterbury that some had been talking about Stephen Cottrell doing now from his position at the moment as Archbishop of York. What is his position, do you think, in the church, particularly when people hear what we've just been told by that woman?
Well, it's difficult at the moment for people to see the Archbishop of York in any other way than through the prism of what is going on at the moment. Certainly, he has said until this point that he regrets that he wasn't able to act earlier, but it was 9 years into his time as being bishop that this man, David Tudor, was finally suspended, but that was only when a police investigation was started. And Mr. Cottrell, Archbishop Cottrell, has said that this situation was awful to live with and to manage, but I think these women are still waiting to hear of a moment where they were put first in all of this. And there were lots of decisions made along the way. You talked about the renewal of his position as area dean, the fact that this man was in fact 5 years into the time of Stephen Cottrell being bishop, was even made honorary canon of Chelmsford Cathedral. Those women are still waiting for a time when they feel that they were put first rather than the priest in question.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that Stephen Cottrell has said is when he joined the Chelmsford Diocese, this is 2010, he said the risk was managed, but it wasn't possible to remove David Tudor from office. I mean, that is something that the women concerned, find very difficult to understand.
That's right. I mean, so Stephen Cottrell walks in as Bishop of Chelmsford in 2010. He learns about not just those 2 sexual abuse allegations, but many sexual abuse allegations against this priest in his charge, David Tudor, knows that this is a priest who is by that stage already banned from being alone with children. He learns a couple of years later that David Tudor paid £10,000 to an alleged victim. Later in 2018, 2019, the church itself makes a 6-figure sum payment and an apology to another victim, and yet he's still not suspended. So yes, Stephen Cottrell says the focus was on managing the risk, but a lot of people will say, well, why do you need to manage the risk of a priest? There must be a way of removing a priest that poses any kind of risk at all. And also for women like the one you heard from, it isn't just about managing risk. It is the fact that David Tudor was in the priesthood at all that was itself traumatising.
And yet we hear that Stephen Cottrell is going to carry on and has no intention of resigning. All of this is going to be discussed, isn't it, the General Synod, because they've got to work out whether they have an outside the church body looking at these matters within the church. We heard from Alexis J. The victim there mentioned Alexis J., who has investigated child abuse in the past and done so on behalf of the church as well. She was frustrated. She came on the programme, was very frustrated, obviously frustrated some days ago, that they hadn't sorted out some sort of independent safeguarding positions for the church. Is that on the cards now at the Synod?
Yes, I mean, so Synod comes together in February. There are questions about, from not just the victims in this case, but victims in other cases, as to why there isn't more of a sense of urgency about, turning this page much more quickly, because, a lot of our listeners will be forgiven for thinking they've heard of these sort of abuse stories before, and then it's business as usual for the church, and then there's another scandal that comes along. So yes, Alexis J., after many reports, inquiries, reviews, has said, look, the church cannot mark its own homework, and actually had suggested a while back that there needs to be complete independence when it comes to safeguarding. And yet we're in a stage where we are there are going to be some proposals put forward in February, but it all still feels like it is a long way down the track when any of these things might be introduced. And I think for some of the women involved in this case, for victims in other cases, for clergy actually up and down the country, for people associated with the church who care about the church, there is a sense I'm getting, not just from this case, but the one that led to the resignation of the Archbishop of Canterbury last month. There is a sense that there's a lot of feeling that enough is enough, really, and that there needs to be a sense of urgency here, and that this really does need to be dealt with in a radical way to stop this happening time and again.
Sleem Makbool, thank you.
The time now is